So we'll begin the formal part of the evening by me telling you where I am. I'm in Melbourne, and I'm on the land of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And I want to acknowledge the elders of the Boonwurrung people, past and present. And I want to recognize that we're on the land of the Boonwurrung people, who are the indigenous people of the land. Now, for many years, we've been saying this in Australia, saying something about the indigenous people, saying something about where we fit in the historic scheme of things in Australia. And it's very important for us to recognise the indigenous people and to recognise Australian history. But when I travelled overseas, I always found it strange that I didn't have something to say right at the beginning. You know, I'd sort of get up and sort of look dumbly at everybody for a minute. And I realised that most places haven't really thought or come to terms with so much of their own history. And if I'm an Indigenous person, I'm an Indigenous person to Israel. That's where I'm an Indigenous person. So the land to which I'm attached is Israel, even though I live in Australia, and therefore my heritage is mixed. So I'm sure this is true for all of you. The days from October 7 have been unlike any others in our lives. We have been so caught up. Our feelings have been trammeled, is all I can say. Our hearts have stopped so many times. And we've been also incredibly aware of what's going on around us in terms of the response of the rest of the community to October 7 with the rise of anti-Semitism. But even with what's going on here, so much of our heart and minds are in Israel. And it's very important for us to have an understanding of what's going on, to keep on talking to people, to have new conversations, to understand nuance that so often it's easy to miss in our own circumstance. So tonight we're very lucky to have Daphna Hacker, who's going to speak to us. But before Daphna speaks, I'll introduce Leanne, who will introduce Daphna.
Is that it?
That is it.
Okay. Hi, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Leanne Basser. I'm really, really pleased to have the opportunity to welcome my very dear friend, Professor Daphna Hacker. Daphna has been to Australia and spoken for National Council previously, in person on that occasion, but that's some years ago now. She's a full professor in the Faculty of Law and in the National Council of Jewish Women and Gender Studies program at Tel Aviv University. She's both a legal scholar and a sociologist. Her PhD is in sociology. Daphna's social legal research focuses on the intersection of law, families, and gender. She's an internationally renowned scholar in these fields and has published numerous articles in leading legal and socio-legal journals. She's also the author of 3 books. Her most recent book was published in 2017. It followed a significant period of research. It's published by Cambridge University Press, and it's titled Legalized Families in an Era of Bordered Globalization. So she was looking at cross-border issues that arise in families. The book won the Best Book Award that's offered by the American Law and Society Association. This is just really touching on her publications because she's done just so much more work. Anyway, Daphna is a leading Israeli feminist activist. She's won many prizes for her contribution to the promotion of the status of women, including the Jewel Bellish Outstanding Israeli Feminist Award in 2019 by our sisters in the USA, the National Council of Jewish Women. Last year, she was appointed to the United Nations International Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, known as CEDAW, for a 3-year term. Indeed, she was at the UN in Geneva immediately after the atrocities of October 7 and experienced firsthand the bias against Israel. Since then, Daphna, with two colleagues, has established the Forum for the Day After the War. This forum raises awareness of the need to have a geopolitical plan for the region, in addition to the military operation in Gaza, as well as drawing attention to the gendered dimensions of war. And of course, the topic tonight relates to gender and war. Over to you, Daphna.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Thank you, Melinda, for the invitation. Thank you all for joining us today. I will give you a presentation that is followed by a PowerPoint with a lot of mostly newspaper clips. I think the way I present it is echoing the sense of the intense news that we constantly have to face, which is part of these very, very difficult times. But then, of course, I would be grateful if we can open it up for discussion, questions, comments. I'm interested in your perspective and really eager to hear you. So let's start with that. Okay, so as you heard, I'm a professor at Tel Aviv University, and usually I study families, but like so many others, after 7th of October, I'm finding myself doing things that I didn't do before. And part of it is thinking and talking and looking for information on the gender dimensions of what it is that we're going through. So just to remind ourselves what it is that we are facing in the last 4 months. So in 7th of October, Israel experienced the most horrible attack that occurred in one day. Never before did we experience so many losses in one day. So 1,500 terrorists, mainly Hamas, broke the border from Gaza, killing more than 1,300 civilians and soldiers, and kidnapping more than 200. And here we see the upper picture is from one of the kibbutzim that were burned, and the lower one is from the party, the huge nature party that so many young people found their death in. And also you can see it's burned. We are also facing, in the first time of Israeli history, a situation of tens of civilians and soldiers being kidnapped. And during the first 3 months, we had 7 rounds of deals, so to say, with Hamas, in which 105 people were freed. Still, there are 134 people kidnapped, and we don't know how many of them are alive, how many are dead, and the estimations are that at least 30 to 50 people are no longer with us, so we're talking about bodies. Israel, after 3 weeks of preparation, launched a war in Gaza with very, very high numbers of people killed. 28,000 Palestinians are killed. Many of them are women and children. More than 1 million are internally displaced. Israel pushed them from the northern part of Gaza to the southern part. They're all concentrated there because Hamas did not separate civilians from its operations, and you had to evacuate all the civilians in order to do anything effective in the northern part of Gaza. The destruction of Gaza is significant, with estimation of 45% of houses destroyed. So at the end, when I will mention the day after the war, we have to understand that this very tiny and very heavily populated piece of land will have to undergo very substantial rebuild. IDF soldiers are paying a very high toll, with 235 soldiers killed, in addition to those who were murdered on October 7th, and more than 5,500 soldiers wounded. Again, never have we experienced such a number of soldiers that will need severe rehabilitation after their casualties. In addition, more than 100,000 Israeli are internally displaced. They are evacuated from their houses in the northern and southern border. Again, never in our history did such a magnitude of families forced to move from one place to the other within their own homeland, Israel. We have to understand that the Hamas and Israel conflict is just one piece in a regional puzzle of a jihadist axis that is run by Iran, but that has militias in Iraq, in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is currently our biggest threat, Hamas in Gaza, part of the Palestinians in the West Bank, and the Houthim in Yemen, which I don't know if you ever heard of the Houthim. Many of us didn't until October 7th. And all of a sudden, we are facing missiles to Eilat, to the southern part of Israel, from this terrorist organization that rules Yemen. And all of a sudden, we have to understand this regional geopolitical situation. Of course, it's not only regional, it's global. And Israel allies, the United States, and now also Australia, New Zealand, Canada, are extremely worried about the situation and trying to establish a counter-moderate axis that is led by the US and joined by the moderate Arab countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, to prevent further escalation. But the Israeli society is internally rift over the question of what is the solution. With here you have demonstration that calls to reoccupy the Gaza Strip, rebuild the Jewish settlements that were evacuated from it. And on the other hand, we went back to our Saturday's demonstration that for a year we had fighting the attempt of the government to weaken democracy, and now back again in the streets calling for a ceasefire as part of this broader effort to secure Israel without further fighting the Palestinians. And all this really horrible, shocking, devastating, really, I don't have enough words to describe our situation. All of that is happening at the same year that Israel has dropped in its position in relation to gender equality by 20 places globally. You see here two global measures. One is the World Economic Forum, and the other one is set in Washington, D.C. And both these measures have ranked Israel about 20 places and more lower than it was in 2022, because this current government hardly has women as ministers, as heads of ministries, as parliament members, and we saw women here. I don't know if you're familiar, maybe you already heard about Bonot Alternativa. It's a new NGO that demonstrated with these clothes to signal the tens of law proposals that the new government is trying to push forward that will harm women's status in Israel. So what I will try to do is move with this gendered lens on different issues that are related to the war, again, realizing that this is something that we have never experienced before, still is rooted within Israeli society now and here. So let's start with women in the IDF. Overall, we are witnessing this historical progress in which, from 1995, in which the Supreme Court ordered the IDF to open the Air Force to women as pilots, more and more positions in the military are open to women, with today more than 90% of jobs in the army can be held by women. And in 2016, it was the first time in the IDF history in which we had the same percentages of secretary soldiers as combat unit soldiers. So as time passes, we see them moving on to being commanders. And in 2022, just less than 2 years ago, a pilot of allowing women to become part of tank crews was declared success by the IDF. So this is one theme of what's going on in our army. But on the other hand, in recent years, we have more and more pressure on the IDF to exclude women completely from military service, and in particular from combat units. And this pressure comes from religious parties, religious leaders, religious rabbis. We have now more religious soldiers in the army, especially as commanders. And this group that we call the nationalist and Zionist religious people in Israel are becoming more and more orthodox, adopting practices from the ultra-Orthodox Haredi communities. Hence, their soldiers more and more refusing to serve with women, refusing to, from hearing female soldiers singing on stage to driving with them in the same car, from receiving orders from them as commanders. So the IDF is really caught in between these two vectors. And then came October 7, and for the first time in Israeli history, we see women in leading combat positions in high percentages. I don't know if you heard the heroic fight of all-female tank crews on October 7, which really saved whole kibbutzim from being invaded, blocking the border from other and additional terrorists entering. If you haven't heard of it, please look it up. It's amazing to listen to them and to see and understand what it is that they have done for hours and hours of fighting and really assisting the battle. But this goes on, and again, never in Israeli history did we have so many female soldiers and doctors in the territory of the enemy. We have now in Gaza women fighters and women doctors, and this is unprecedented. We see a rise in, since October 7, of young women who want to join the IDF as combat soldiers. And just to show you how dramatic it is, here in Hebrew, you have the division between female and male students in my university, Tel Aviv University, who served in reserve during this war. And you see that 36% of the students who miss university, who miss their courses, and this is a whole challenge now in our campus, are women, more than a third. Again, it was unimaginable a few years ago that so many women are drafted in reserve to fight and to assist the fighters in the battle. Still, of course, the gender question is with us. It's not over, although all these women participate in the war. For example, we are still heading for an investigation why the female soldiers who are the eyes on the border were disregarded, and their warning that Hamas is preparing, is on the border, is coming, were disregarded. We have hostages that were murdered, that were raped, and we don't know what impact that will have for the long run on the question of women participating in battle. This is one of the young women that was murdered, and she was kidnapped as a soldier. So again, going back to the question of soldiers, female soldiers at the border. And again, we all have to understand that although women are part of all this effort, when it comes to combat soldiers, still the vast majority are men. Those that are paying with their lives are men, mainly those that are coming wounded and with mental problems are men, and we'll go back to that in a second. And I'm just showing you one picture of Ido Rosenthal, one of Israel's heroes. He was the husband of a PhD student of mine, and he was killed on battle on 7th October. And again, just one human face that I know to remind us that behind each number, there are people, there are families, there are communities that are experiencing horrible loss. The issue that attracted most attention is sexual violence. And again, for the first time, because the Hamas terrorists had hours in kibbutzim, in towns, in civil places, in military camps. They were out for hours in IDF military camps, undisturbed. They could do whatever it is that they wanted. And we know at least of 30 victims of sexual violence. And we have here 2 pictures of victims. And we know that it was systematic because it occurred in 7 different arenas during the 7th of October. But very early on, I realized that we will never know the magnitude of the sexual violence. Here you have, again, it's in Hebrew, I apologize, but I published in the newspaper an article saying to the public, we will never know, we have to accept that. And here in the big picture, you see the horrid vision of bodies that are wrapped in these containers. Because again, you have to understand that the chaos was complete. And the first priority was to bring the murdered to Jewish burial as soon as possible. And the women were buried and men were buried. Even we don't know if men were sexually mutilated, and they were buried without a forensic examination, and forensic evidence was not collected from the scenes of October 7. Nobody thought of that, nobody did it. And these are the main reasons why we will never know the magnitude. Most of those who were violated were murdered and no evidence was collected. Yet there were very dramatic campaigns, and you see some examples and some newspaper reports, for example, in Haaretz, saying that the testimony after testimony, the scope is revealed. And again, I'm arguing that this is inaccurate. And on the one hand, these campaigns forced the international community that refused to accept the fact that part of the war was, and part of Hamas atrocities was sexual violence. It forced them to acknowledge it, and even EU and Women, after 2 months, acknowledge it. And a week ago, we had the special rapporteur, Carmela Patton, visiting with a historical visit, but even she could not find direct testimonies because, again, most were murdered, and those who survived are still unwilling to publicly testify. So this is a challenge on the international sphere and the legal sphere that we still have to face. And this is a report, a very worrying report, that the police is forcing hospitals to reveal confidential information about victims without their informed consent. Again, part of my criticism is that this moral panic is pushing towards irresponsible reports and practices. Again, I'm sure you'll have questions on that in the Q&As. Another dilemma was regarding the hostages. And among those that were released are almost all children and women, and they were released before the men. And when the few who were left, when Hamas refused to release them and said, we will give you only male hostages now, Israel broke the ceasefire. And again, in maybe an unpopular opinion that I published, again, it's in Hebrew, I apologize, together with Daphna Joel, we argued that it's time to release men as well. This is gender-based discrimination that cannot be justified. Even if in the beginning it could have been, of course, children should be released first, but why women? We think it's a question, and it's unclear who insisted it would be women at first. Was it Qatar or Hamas or Israel? But certainly after 2 months in captivity, when those who were released telling us that they didn't have enough food, medicine is lacking, it's a horrible experience regardless of your gender. So we think that Israel made a mistake to break the ceasefire when more men could have been saved. Another very worrying dimension is what we call the home front, but it's so much more than the home. But it is the home. It's the labor market, and we see. I can tell you that when we started to meet students on campus, we postponed our semester in 2 months and then reopened the campus. And when we talked with our female students, some of them who had partners in the IDF, mainly in reserved service, are devastated. They cannot sleep. I have friends who are mothers to soldiers. They haven't been sleeping for 4 months. So the emotional toll is very, very hard, very heavy. And in addition, we see mothers being fired from their jobs because they have to care for 1, 2, 3, 4 months for the children of single mothers. And we have now discussions in our parliament what to do. But Itach Ma'aki is about to publish, one of Israeli feminist NGOs, to publish a report on the meager legal protection that these women and mothers are granted. A lot of bureaucracy that the state doesn't even bother to tell the women, here are the rights, your rights, here is the way that you can secure them. And we learn from stories that employers are pressuring mothers either to stay and work full-time or to let go completely, which again is devastating for economic and for career reasons. Interestingly, even male soldiers, reserved soldiers, are being fired now because they are gone for so long. So for the first time, we see men realizing what it is to be a woman in the labor market, that, you know, you're absent for your maternity leave for 4 months and you have no place to return to. But this is, again, a huge challenge of the imbalance of the burden of what's going on. Another very disturbing thing, and we feminist activists, we warned that this is going to happen because we learned the lessons of COVID, but our government did not. And some of those who are displaced, who are away from their homes, are concentrated in hotels rooms. So you have one hotel room with a family of 5. So of course we have higher percentage of domestic violence, and you have youngsters who are out of schools, traumatized by 7th October, out of their homes and communities. And of course, we will have sexual assaults at these hotels. And now we have, for the last 2 weeks, we have reports on that. But again, we knew it's going to happen. So with all these social, gendered challenges, who are the people around the decision-making people? And again, we saw it in COVID, and we are seeing it again. Almost completely only men in the government. We have a security cabinet, we have a smaller security cabinet, and there are 2 women out of 14 in the security cabinet. And we have hardly any female ministers in the government as a whole. And you can see that in the pictures here. So all those who are making decisions about all these issues and their gender dimensions have no idea what it is to be a care provider for 3 children. I have to mention what is going on in Gaza, because of course, in Gaza, it's even worse when it comes to the toll on women, and it's worse when it comes to the question who makes the decision. No women at all are involved in the Hamas leadership, and women are really, again, there are no words to describe the humanitarian crisis that the Palestinian women and girls are facing in Gaza right now. Here on the upper right, the upper left side, you see a report of the activity of Israeli, Jewish, and Palestinian from Ramallah that took place just in December and 2023, and this was going on really all along, and women wage peace is at the front of insisting for a peaceful resolution. And you see here the picture of Vivian Silver, one of the most prominent activists of women wage war, who was murdered in her kibbutz on October 7 by Hamas terrorists. And her house was burned to the ground. And so for weeks, we and her family, we didn't know. We thought that she was kidnapped because there was no body and only the ashes that were later identified. So again, one story of so many more. At the bottom, you see Professor Daphna Joel and Dr. Ronit Levin-Schnur, who are the leaders of the Day After the War that they have established with me, which is a multidisciplinary forum of academics who insist on the urgent need of Israel to join the moderate axis to secure its borders, its existence, its flourishing, its international status. Again, unfortunately, the current government is refusing to adopt this program, risking us all. I want to end my presentation and really to open it up for your comments and questions with these quotes from Effie Ziv article on persistent trauma. Because I think that what most feminist activists know is that trauma is not something that comes and goes. Gendered trauma is part of our lives as women. And her theory is calling us to understand trauma as a socio-political pathology. So it will only be resolved with a social political plan and understanding and a network that will hold us all together. And it's not a matter of, you know, this short-term intervention or that short-term intervention. We are all traumatized. Every mother who has a son in Israel, I can tell you my example. When my son was born, the first thought that came across my mind is, how am I going to save his life? as a soldier. This is not normal when you have a new baby. So again, the challenge is so much bigger than, you know, providing psychologists to those who are returning from combat now. It's important, it's crucial, it should be done, but our mission is so much bigger than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Daphna. I have to pause before I can say anything more. There are so many questions I have, but I'm going to let other people raise their hands. Now, you can put your question into the chat, or alternatively, you can raise your hand by going to reactions down the bottom of your screen and raising your hand. And Danielle, will you look after the questions that come into the chat, please?
Sure, not a problem. You can also physically raise your hand and I will put you in a queue to speak.
Thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you, Daphna. Do we have anyone with a hand up?
Not yet.
All right, in that case, maybe I'll come in with my question is whether you can talk a little bit more about the role of the ceasefire. Yeah, no, just perhaps you could just talk more about it rather than me.
Well, it depends on the stage of the war. I think in the beginning, when I'm talking about the ceasefire, we meant another one to release more hostages and return of more prisoners. Now, when we're talking about the ceasefire, it's not only for that. We are calling the Israeli government to tell the world, what are the surrender conditions? What would make the Israeli government stop the war? And unfortunately, the Israeli government has not detailed these conditions. And without these conditions, there cannot be a ceasefire that is meaningful, that is one step before a geopolitical policy for the region. So this is where we're standing, where we don't even know what it would take for the Israeli government to accept another ceasefire. So what we're saying, it's not only in the hands of Hamas, and we have to be proactive in detailing what is our plan. And if Hamas declines, then Israel has more legitimacy to go on fighting. But we're not even, you know, spelling out what it is that we are expecting. Then this is one reason we are losing international support.
Well, from the Australian point of view, ceasefire is seen as giving in to Hamas because ceasefire would inevitably be on whatever terms Hamas put. And we need to have the statement that that a ceasefire can be on other terms, and we can mean surrender, the terms of
Exactly.
surrender rather than
Exactly. If Israel says we will stop the war, if Hamas leaders surrender, if they are exiled to another country or imprisoned, if an international force will enter Gaza and will take over civil authority until Palestinian moderate anti-terrorist authority will be able to take over, et cetera, et cetera. But we're not even saying that. And then if Hamas says, no, we will never surrender, we are going to fight till death, then I believe countries like Australia will not issue a statement against Israel. They will only say, let's find a way of entering Rafah without additional 30,000 Palestinian dead, which is a huge challenge that, you know, it's easy said than done, of course. But when the Israeli government doesn't even say that, then what is the aim of the war? And again, going back to the hostages, they're dying, they are killed. And so
we don't want to believe that. We don't want to believe that, but we all know it's true.
We know it's true, and there is intel I'm telling you, the minimum is 30 that are already gone, and it's probably much higher.
Aileen,
Eileen, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
I guess I'm sort of thinking in more of less slightly politically, but more from the Australian perspective of, so to explain, I lived in Sydney back in 30 years ago when I was basically 19, and the attitude of the Arab men, because I look like one of them, was extremely traumatic, because they not only harassed me for walking around uncovered, without a male escort, etc., because they assumed I was Lebanese or Palestinian, looking at me because I look what I am. I look like my grandmother, who was an Ashkenazi Jew. And I'm sort of thinking, how do we, and I'm seeing a lot of rise of this anti-Semitism and this aggression against Jewish women, and just basically being, politically, how do you fight something where people basically don't want to believe you? Like, if I tell people this, they don't want to believe me. They just don't understand that it's not just a political thing, but it's something that we live as we walk around, as we breathe, as and I've actually been mansplained on one of my older male relatives' posts about, well, no, it doesn't matter what's happening to the Israeli women over there, because it's a nothing, and I'm like, well, if it can happen to women here 30 years ago, where they can be threatened, where they can be pulled in, threatened to be pulled into cars, threatened to be pulled off the street, threatened to be assaulted, then what's not to be believed?
yeah, thanks, Eileen.
Yeah, I think, it's the anti-Semitism around the globe is horrifying, and it's devastating to learn how easily it's triggered. And I want to take a few things from what you're describing. First is that I think not enough. I'm going to talk about the feminist international arena for a second, because you would expect that arena to be the first to condemn harms to all women, regardless of who they are. And this is not happening. So first, I think that not enough emphasis is given on the way that Hamas is oppressing its own population, the way Hamas is oppressing women, and your description of, how as an alleged Arab Muslim woman, you're not allowed to walk alone on the street. It's not as if Hamas is this liberating force for women. It's the oppressor. And it's a failure on our behalf, not that the world doesn't know it. It's a failure of the UN for not recognizing Hamas as a terrorist organization. The US has done so, the EU has done so, but Russia is blocking the UN from declaring Hamas as a terrorist organization. And we have to understand that Russia and China are in the game, going back to Australia. We are worried about China more than we are, but China is a global threat, and it's not only Iran. And Russia, just this week, the leader of the opposition is being tortured to death. These are the leaders of the world now, and we are all captured in that sense. And that is why we all have to unite. Going back to Israel, I think that the fact that for the last 20 years, Israel did not do anything to promote peace, and has established more and more communities in the West Bank, and has militarized the settlers, is creating an oppression in the world that Israel is always to be blamed, can never be the victim. So how do you create this complexity that even if you oppose the occupation, that doesn't mean that the lives of Israeli women worth nothing? Is a huge challenge that so far we are failing in. I can tell you in my community in CEDAW, so I was there for the session just right after the attack, but they just ended another session and I didn't travel to Geneva this time. I just couldn't handle it emotionally because I knew that this is what's going to happen again. So I don't have these magic answers because it is really, really, really hard for all of us. But we still have to find the language, to find the statistics, to find the stories, to force the world to realize what it is that we are facing, and to insist on the complexity that all lives matter. And that if you disregard the lives of Jewish and Israeli women, you're anti-Semitic. That's it.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat that I might read out to you because it's quite long. Do Israelis, men and women, identify the gender bias in Israel? And how important do you think it will be in post-war Israel? The writer goes on to say, as a female doctor, immigrant Muslim men still prefer to see a male doctor. So I assume there is a gender bias in Arabic society. How can this be changed? And do you think religion plays a role in this bias?
Well, I have to say that in Israel, the problem with male and female doctors is not among the Muslim community, it's among the ultra-Orthodox community. So what we are facing is more and more exclusion of women from the public sphere in the name of ultra-Orthodox rights. So we have it in buses and in funerals and in performances and in the IDF, as I said. So this is our challenge. It can go both ways. On the one hand, we can be optimistic that the gender lens will not disappear, because one of the things that we have witnessed during the year fighting the anti-democratic legislation was that women's issue became mainstream in the liberal camp struggles. So in many demonstrations, again, for weeks we've been demonstrating, there would be at least one speech in the name of women's rights. And Bonot Alternativa, which I mentioned, is the first NGO that managed in a very short time to recruit 40,000 women from around the country. So it's kind of a grassroots on a scale that we never knew before. And they become a very significant public voice in Israel activism, and they're not going anywhere. They're part of the game. So hopefully the gender lens will stay with us. On the other hand, most Israeli public are devastated. You see less activism. You see less people in the streets. People are depressed, are anxious, are in a survival mode. And when people are in survival mode, all they care for is security. We see that in the polls and surveys that we are conducting. So all other matters are pushed. It's not the time to talk about it. And I can give you one example. One of the major organization in the protest for democracy is called Achim Laneshek, Brothers in Arm. And I just met one of my students is an activist, a female activist in Achim Laneshek, in Brothers in Arm. And she told about their struggle, so it would become Brothers and Sisters in Arm. And they just added the dots and the Hebrew words, the Hebrew letters to signify that it includes women. Yeah. And I was ambivalent about what she said. I have to say, I told her, is this the time for these kinds of struggles? Do we have the energy to insist on this symbolic recognition of women And Brothers in Arms is their slogan, is their power within Israeli society because they are male soldiers. So again, maybe they're right, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but even for me, it's unclear how urgent it is to be smart and not only just under these circumstances, when we have so many challenges. We have to pick our battles, we have to be united. So I, for example, would have not insisted on this symbolic recognition.
So it's, a woman has just commented that she was at their office. In English, it is Brothers and Sisters in Arms.
Wonderful. I'm glad.
Then we have a question about the impact, the widespread of self-defense weapons after October 7th is having on women's safety. I've seen articles that highlight the loose regulations and the impact it might have on domestic violence.
Indeed, we are extremely worried. We are angry. We are frustrated. We have, as the Minister of Interior Defense, the Internal Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir. He was convicted in felonies involving weapon himself. His wife goes with 2 guns in her belt as a settler. And what he did was loosening the regulation on who can carry a gun that pushes us towards the US culture of guns. And we all know what happens in the US. So first to pay the price are Palestinians, Israelis, who are being harassed now with civilians that are armed. But we are all next. Nobody's safe when guns are privatized. Nobody. And women at home are not safe, of course. So it's gun corruption. I have no better words for that. It's gun corruption.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was about how few women there are at the table, and therefore, how do we reach peace when we know when women come to the table, we're more likely to. How do you propose, or are there suggestions of how we can get more women to the table beyond having an election? And given that that Israel's gone through 5 elections in as many years, how do we get more women to the table?
So one of the things that some of us are hoping is that it won't take an election to change the government, and that Netanyahu can take the 2 of the most radical right-wing parties and let in the more moderate ones. He can do that if he chooses. And there will be more women because with these parties, there will be more women. We have to understand the huge political power of the ultra-Orthodox parties. There are 2 of them, and there are no women in these parties. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. They agreed to erase the restriction, the former restriction on women as candidates. But they told the Supreme Court, bluntly, this won't help. We will never nominate a woman as a parliament member. So as long as they have the power and other parties are willing to surrender to their demands, then we are with female deficit by definition. I have to say that when it comes to this current government, I'm not going to fight for more women around the table because they're horrible politicians. There are anti-feminist politicians in this government who are female. So what if they're women? If they are anti-feminist, then why should I fight for them to be around the table? Their voices, again, I don't know how much you hear about some of the coalition female members, but they're really not the voices I would fight for around the table. I think we learned a lesson in the Israeli feminist movement that it's not enough to fight for women around the table. The question is, who are the women around the table? Are they from disadvantaged communities? Are they feminists? Are they going to fight for other women? If the answers are no, no, and no, then I don't think it's worth the feminist battle.
Thank you. We have heard a lot of Me Too and Less Ado about the silence of UN agencies around women. And so somebody's asked the question, have you found allies or supporters within the UN? And how do you cope and perform your role in what is potentially a hostile environment?
So again, I want to say something about the slogan, because when the slogan is Me Too, it says that there are victims who provided testimonies and were disbelieved. And this is not the case. I'm sorry. This is not the case. We don't have live survivors who are willing to publicly testify and then are disbelieved. So women are talking in the name of women. And this is complicated. I'm not sure, again, these are horrible questions and dilemmas, and I apologize in advance. But if my daughter, God forbid, would have been one of the murdered victims of 7th of October, would I want to think about her being raped with the inability to ever know the truth? I'm telling you, in my personal, no, I wouldn't want that in my head. And this campaign that practically said that, you know, every woman or every second woman was raped is wrong to the memory of these women, to the memory, to the welfare of their families. So I think it's wrong to say Me Too, because there are no women who are saying Me Too, and there's no woman who can speak in the name of these women, in my opinion. Again, we are divided within the Israeli feminist movement on these issues. And my opinion is my opinion. So I'm not talking in the name of all feminists in Israel, clearly. Did I find allies? Very few, I have to say. I'm really, I don't know how I'm going to travel again in May. I'm disappointed, I'm angry. I think the committee was politically compromised, not doing its role, not talking about Israeli women live and dead, not caring. So I'm afraid it won't be as it was, and I will find it harder to cooperate. So I'll see. I have my duties there. I will perform them. I'm consulting the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because they have much more experience with hostile international environments. And one of the high positions people there told me, we are in the UN to work, not to make friends. And I'm saddened by that, because I had friends, and some of them were from Arab countries. And it was fantastic to learn from them and to talk about the similarities and to talk about hope. And I'm there 10 weeks a year. It's a lot to be in Geneva, which is a very dull city, and to be alone and far from your family and community. You want to have friends there. But if that's the price, then that's the price. And I will do my job without being happy. But hopefully, again, hopefully, if there will be some kind of improvement in Palestinians' lives after these horrific times, and hopefully if they will be freed from Hamas, it's not only Israel that has to be freed from Hamas, they have to be freed from Hamas as well. So maybe, you know, renewed connections and friendship could be established. But if not, then I can tell you we're facing huge challenge here in Israeli academia. BDS is all over the place now. People are refusing to write recommendation letters, to publish our articles, to cooperate with Israeli academics. Belgium government instructed its universities not to cooperate with Israeli academic institutions. It's all over. So it's a big disappointment, not only from international organizations, but from academia all over the world. So what are we to do now? Are we to, you know, stay in Israel, never travel to conferences again, No, but it's really, really hard.
That kind of leads into the next question, which is about how we instill hope for the future and what is the day after and how can we look forward?
So I think there's a large group of Israelis. I would argue, again, I see surveys that are, not for publication, but we see them. The majority of Israelis would want to have some kind of geopolitical arrangement. The majority of Israel do not want to occupy Gaza and reestablish Israeli settlements there. A huge number do, which is, in my eyes, unbelievable, but a huge number of Israelis do want to occupy Gaza, do want to establish Jewish settlements in Gaza. But the majority do not. And I think that majority acknowledge that for Israel to be safe, it needs international cooperation. It needs international guarantees. We saw that when it comes to military supplies. We cannot satisfy our own military supply. We are dependent on other countries. When the war started, the US brought two, how do you call these huge ships with thousands of
carriers?
What?
Aircraft carriers?
Exactly. Two of those to safeguard our northern border, because if Hezbollah starts to fire, and we are still on the verge of this possibility, you have to understand this is not Hamas. Hezbollah missiles are much more accurate. There are thousands of them, and all of Israel will have to move to the shelters and the grounds for months. So I think most Israelis do not want that reality for themselves. Now, the big challenge is how do we create a government without the ultra-right extremists? And it's unbelievable that nobody in the government thinks that they should resign after the catastrophic outcome of their policy on 7th October. Netanyahu is not going anywhere. We need 5 members of Likud who will resign. That's all we need. And we don't get that. We don't have 5 decent Likud parliament members saying, we have to take responsibility. This cannot go on. We cannot be part of a government that does not have a political plan for the day after the war. But we want to hope that this cannot last and that people will resist, that people will be in the streets, that people will understand that they're fighting for the survival of Israel. But it's a long battle. It's a hard one because the country is divided.
Yeah, it feels like the world is divided as well, based on what is going on in Israel, and even within our own Jewish community, we see different positions being taken on what should be done. But who are we to dictate what should be done by a country on the other side of the world?
So again, we haven't mentioned Trump in the US. We haven't mentioned the elections. One of the things that we feel that this is that the Biden plan is a short-lived window of opportunities is that if Trump will be elected, and again, they're saying he's going to be elected, we have no idea what he's going to do. He hates Netanyahu. What is going to happen? So this responsible adult, we have him now. We don't know if we're going to have him in a year from now. So this is another challenge. I want to address Ann Wollner's comment about the blood on the hostages. Again, we now, and this is not thanks to the Israeli government, who hasn't published any official record of what it is that we know and don't know about sexual rights. Can you understand the magnitude of the failure? That the Israeli government has not issued an official report on what it is that we know and don't know? So the New York Times saved us. with a very thorough investigation. And I can tell you from the inside, you heard Professor Ruth Halperin-Kadari. She's the most responsible academic on the ground, in contact with everybody that should be contacted. She doesn't say anything that is not verified by the police. So you can trust her, and you can trust the New York Times, because we know that their report echoes what it is that we know. So we know about 30 cases, and we know about women that reported, again, not rape, but sexual violence in captivity. And if you feel comfortable saying me too, although it's not you, then that's fine. I don't feel comfortable. I'm sorry. I don't feel comfortable. It rhymes with Jew, but it's not a good reason enough, in my opinion.
One of
We
the
have, sorry, Danielle.
Go ahead.
I was actually going to say that we are way over time, and this has been a very taxing discussion. I think each time Daphna revisits these questions, she is jarred again and again, the same way as we are jarred hearing and being confronted by the reality of the situation. I have a couple of things to say. One is I didn't introduce Leanne to you, which was quite negligent of me. Leanne is mainly important because she's written a number of books with me. And but right now, she says that's not the only reason she's important. She is important because she's a very important Australian feminist and very important part of the Jewish community. And right now, she's the chairperson of Project Rosanna, which is another project that's dealing with Palestinian and Jewish people and building relations and continuing working through the crisis situation. Do you want to add something about it, Leanne, a free advertisement?
Thanks, Melinda. I don't think it's appropriate right now. I would love to talk about Rosanna another time, because we are very much engaged in health diplomacy and building bridges for peace through health. But I think I don't want to detract from what's been said.
Thank you. That's appropriate though, because you did tell us a little bit more about what you're doing. A couple of things that follow on from what Daphna's spoken about. One is that I hope you all know that National Council of Jewish Women are developing a branch of Women Wage Peace in Australia. The next meeting of that group is the 26th of February. So watch out for newsletters for further details.
I'll put the link in the chat for everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. So and the idea of this group is to do something. It's not to sit around and talk about things. It's to actually see what we can do that might make a difference. The next meeting is working with 4 women from Women Wage Peace who are going to talk a lot about how the organisation is structured and how the work processes that are there and the practical way of building an organisation. I also hope that in a few weeks' time, we'll have a webinar about the day after and what the work that Daphna is doing with her colleague Daphna and Ronit. And that's going to be very important information for us all to have to understand where the feminist movement is thinking about what can happen in Israel. We've got the ongoing issue about how we respond to the different things that are happening. And one of the most important things to do is to keep having conversation with people, to keep being informed about what's going on, hearing different perspectives, and really staying tuned for the nuance, because it's the nuance that's going to give you the idea of where to take your thoughts between the major arguments. Daphna, what you've done for us tonight is really quite remarkable. To start with, what you have done is taken us down that nuanced path to understand that that it's not simple to say what it is to have a feminist response to some of this, that there are lots of questions involving women. We need to have a gender lens, but sometimes that doesn't tell us what next, how we respond to what we find with the gendered lens. And we need to work together. Australians are really shocked by the amount of anti-Semitism that we're experiencing, but also being confronted with the fact that we don't have enough knowledge about what goes on in Israel, that we can answer the questions, because so much turns on the conversations we have with our non-Jewish friends. Not that we think we're going to convert people who are enemies, but the reality is that most people aren't enemies, that what we need to do is to get them, we hope, to understand where we're coming from, and understanding that certain things are anti-Semitic that they might not have thought were anti-Semitic. Daphna, I don't know whether you would be happy if anyone was interested in your slides, but are you happy to share them with anyone if they'd like to have them, or is that something we should really talk about? I haven't asked you in advance. So I will speak off screen with Daphna about the possibility of sharing slides if anyone would like them, be in contact with me. If anyone has any more questions, be in contact with me.
So before you conclude, someone has put a lovely message, and this might be a good way to end, which was, and this is Annette saying, "Thank you, Daphna. I hear your heartbreak. How can we support you? Know how much we appreciate what you are doing and what you stand for." So I think that's would be lovely if you can tell us what we can do to support you in your mission.
Thank you so much, and indeed, thank you for the comment. I placed my email down. You are more than welcome to contact for the slides and for anything else. There are many ways to support. I can tell you that we have delegations here to Israel, which are really strengthening us. The fact that people do come in these difficult times, and so again, it's a huge gift, but if some of you are able to come, I think it's a huge contribution to show that you're still believing in Israel and you want to see us and be with us in these difficult times. There are many ways to share information, and in your community, in your family, to learn what is going on. And going back to what Melinda says, I think we are learning a lesson of modesty, in the sense that this is the atrocities were so horrible, and the challenges are so big, that we want to hear others. We want to be inspired. We are not certain anymore of the future. So ways to give us inspiring examples. In the forum, for example, we are searching for inspiration of ways that other conflicts were resolved. Of course, fundraising for concrete. There's so many initiatives on the ground. So if something speaks to you, and you think there's a way to send money, that is always helpful. If you want people to invite feminist leaders from Israel to talk in different opportunities, you see that Zoom is very convenient, and that can be done without costs, etc., etc. So the fact that you came today, the fact that you understand us, even if we don't have to agree on everything, that's fine. But we are all for Israel and for Jews around the world, and we are determined to be strong, and we are determined to prevail. And that is enough for us to be a big community of people who are fighting for a better future for Israelis and for Jews. So I'm sure that those of you who are interested to connect and to find ways, you will.
Thank you so much, Daphna. Well, National Council of Jewish Women is doing what it can. Please be involved. Please come to us with any ideas. Daphna, thank you so much for your time, for your thought, and most importantly, thank you for your work. It's important to us all.
Thank you, Melinda, for having us, and me. Thank you. Bye-bye.